What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are back with another draft breakdown for the Detroit Lions. And today, we are moving on to the offensive line with Colby Sorsdal, the Lions' second to last draft pick. So let's get it started. Welcome, everybody, to a video. Glad you guys are here. And yes, we are back to do another one of these draft breakdowns, man. And I was excited for this one because when we selected this player, I knew nothing about him, and I felt kind of bad. You know, we're live streaming, we're waiting for the pick, we're all excited, and boom, the Lions select Colby Sorsdal, and it's like, okay, it's an offensive lineman. That's all I know because it says it on the screen. I knew nothing about this player. I really didn't even know what William & Mary was. So this was someone that I was like, man, I can't wait to watch this dude because I have no clue. I don't know a thing about this guy. I don't know a thing about this dude. All I knew is that he played right tackle because we looked it up and is measurable. It was a little bit different because you don't have a ton of household names that he was matching up against on a week-by-week basis. You look at their schedule and you start rolling through the teams that they played and you start watching the games, the Elons, the Rhode Islands, and you're kind of like, man, I don't really know who any of these guys are across from him. I mean, they played at Virginia a couple years ago, but really until I got to the Shrine Bowl, I had no idea who he was matched up against week by week. I had no idea who he was lined up across from. So it's a little bit different in that sense because you can't really compare directly. Like, hey, I remember this tackle did this to that guy, so look at how he's comparing. You don't really know who these dudes are that he's lining up against, and I do feel like there's, not only because of the NFL, there's always going to be a leap in speed, but I think legitimately the game's going to be a little bit faster for him. Plus, he's getting work at guard for the Lions reportedly, which makes sense. I think that's probably going to end up his position in the NFL. Though, from watching him, I do feel like he could play right tackle. That may not bring the best out of him for a long-term situation, but I do feel like he could play tackle based on what we asked of our offensive linemen this past season. However, seemingly he's going to project to the inside because of some of the measurables, and because of that you're also having to project a little bit in that sense as well, and that makes the game faster because guys are on you a lot quicker. They're immediately on you, and while I think that can play into his strengths, it is a difference to transition from outside to inside. So there's a lot of things going on here. It's a position I definitely don't think I'm the most confident in. However, I love watching offensive linemen, so this was an exciting one, man. I'm excited to dive into this. So let's start with a quick little background here. Who in the world is Colby Sorsdal? That was the question on draft day. We're going to talk about it today. Stop. Colby Sorsdal, as we touched on, went to William & Mary. He was a 5-year player at William & Mary that started all 5 seasons for them, listed at 6'5", 304 pounds. Now, I'm going to go through my player comparison in a second to maybe kind of put it in perspective just in terms of the build and the profile. Also, the guy that I'm going to compare it to was drafted in the same round, and he was drafted by the LA Rams, so I see some schematic overlap potentially there. Brad Holmes was there when they selected him, but we'll get to that in a second. But the main point here that I threw up on the screen is that you can see all the starts are at right tackle. He started 10 games at right tackle as a true freshman. He was like the second true freshman to do that since like 1982. That may be the wrong year. I think it's that. Started 3 games at right tackle in 2020. That was the junior season. Reason for that, of course, it was the COVID year. They were 1-2 that season. And then, of course, this past year, 13 games, right tackle, played in the Shrine Bowl. But you can see all of his starts are at right tackle. And that's one of the biggest differences between the player that I'm going to compare him to is that the player I'm comparing him to went to Wisconsin, much bigger school, bigger competition. However, the difference was that was a player that was transitioning from multiple positions. This guy has tons of experience at the right tackle position, playing the position. I think you see it in some of his strengths of his game, where it's like, man, he looks pretty polished in that area. But here's my player comparison. Now, I'm going to read off the player I'm comparing him to, just in terms of build to kind of put it in perspective, but you guys can see all the testing scores there in the bottom left. And as I said, 6'5", 304 pounds. The player I've compared him to, as I touched on, was drafted by the LA Rams back in 2019 in the 5th round, and that is David Edwards out of Wisconsin, who was listed in at 6'2", 308. He had a 25.5-inch vertical, so 2 inches shorter there than Colby Sorsdal, a 7.693 3-cone, very similar, 33 3/8-inch arms, very similar. It's one of the big reasons that Colby Sorsdal is expected to kick inside because of a little bit of his lack of length. 9 3/4-inch hands, essentially the same as Colby Sorsdal. He ran a 5.28 40, 16 bench press reps, which is 5 less than Colby Sorsdal, but he did have a better 10-yard split, though Colby Sorsdal's 10-yard split was at his pro day, which came in at a 191. So very similar in terms of build, both 5th round picks. I think it just makes sense from a profile standpoint. Player who went from quarterback to tight end to right tackle, played right guard for the Rams, specifically you saw in 2019. I think another player you can compare him to potentially based on what they bring to the table skill set wise is a guy like Austin Blythe, who was a 7th round pick by the Indianapolis Colts. He also played guard for the Rams. I think there's some similarities in skill set there. Now that's not to say I went through and watched a ton of Austin Blythe, but just based on what people were saying about him coming out and how I feel about Colby Sorsdal, I can see where you could have some similarities there. So to me, it makes a ton of sense in terms of when you saw what type of offensive lineman the Rams were going after when Brad Holmes was there, some of those day 3 offensive linemen that they went after. You can see some of these similarities here, I think, in Colby Sorsdal and match up the profile. Again, I do believe that he could play at right tackle because of what we asked. We have a lot of those 45-degree pass sets, which he did a lot with William and Mary, and also on top of that, I think some of the run scheme, he definitely has the zone effectiveness, and I think he could do that from the tackle position with his cutoff quickness. But with that being said, I believe he's probably going to go to guard. It also makes sense on how we're built with having Taylor Decker, Penei Sewell for the future at guard. That looks like a position where next year we could have a lot of question marks. I think when you look down the road, Big V going to be a free agent after this year. Jonah Jackson is set to be a free agent. So you could have some holes to plug, and maybe that could be an opportunity for him to step in after this season. But at very least for this year, focused on the present, this was a position that felt like a must. Having a backup offensive lineman. The Lions dressed it a couple times, but this definitely felt like a position the Lions had to hit on. Okay, regardless. I mean, we love the position flexibility there, though. Who he has to slide in for. So the fact that he's played tackle, I think is going to be beneficial because I do think there's going to be real ability to potentially move around a little bit for him. But with that being said, let's dive into what I see from this player, and I'm going to throw some clips as I go through. And then at the end, we'll do the similar type of grading system. I'll take some traits and I'll grade them at the end. That way you guys can see them and see how I measured them out, just like we did with the Antoine Green video. If you haven't seen that, you can go check that out. Let's start off with the run blocking side first for Colby Sorsdal. Then we'll transition into the pass protection because I do like his run blocking more than his pass protection at this point in time. And this was a guy that played in a very zone heavy scheme for William and Mary, and I'll try not to repeat myself too much here. I will point out I'm going to sometimes say things like, look at the light blue team and then what he's doing. That way I get the right clip matched up. Hopefully, I throw these clips on after I do it. So, if I say like, oh, dark blue team, then you're like, who in the world is he talking about? That's just to remind myself. That way I can put the right clip over it. So that's why. If that sounds weird, it's just something I may say as we go through this. The first thing that you notice very quickly with him is the twitch off the line of scrimmage. So you're talking about some of the backside of those zone runs, reach blocks, getting off the line of scrimmage, positioning himself to cut off some of those blocks with reach blocks, defensive tackles, 3 techniques, things like that. Get himself in a position to get on the backside and seal off the backside. Sometimes it's getting up to the second level, and we'll talk about that a little bit separately. However, we'll start here because one area which I love him, and I say this is an area where it'll help him a lot, I think, transitioning to guard. While things will get faster just generally because you're moving inside and guys are right over top of you, athletically speaking, what's going to help him here, I believe, is the twitch off the line of scrimmage. And this will help him especially as a run blocker, especially on these zone plays. It's going to be important as well on some of the gap plays that we used last season. We did it a lot of the time. We had a lot of success of teams that may play less defensive linemen, so the Lions lean a little bit more to the gap scheme, where they kind of lean a little bit more on leverage than they do necessarily power. So in that case, maybe you're either having that down block, which is where this kind of plays in, or you have him pulling around. And there's I could probably count on my hands how many times he was utilized as a pulling offensive lineman on some of those power run plays, but we'll talk about that separately. Let's start about on the backside, specifically as a zone blocker. And I think what stands out here is that twitch, the quickness off the line of scrimmage, the quickness into his target. A lot of times on these zone plays, you're kind of blocking an area more so, but again, it can show up sometimes on those down blocks as well. It's just the twitch off the line of scrimmage. You saw it in the Shrine Bowl there against number 54 in light blue. The reach blocks was around the 3 tech to open up the run lane. Like, that's something that you see consistently, and it's one of the better traits of his game. We'll talk about the acceleration up to the second level a little bit more in a second, but just to get off on the line of scrimmage, getting yourself set and then being able to create leverage is going to be very important, especially once you're kicked inside. Now, where I think you need more consistency is leverage into contact. Usually it seems like a little bit of a longer runway he gets if you can grab an extra step before having to get contact, specifically for some of those down blocks. He can usually create a little bit better leverage. However, when it's kind of instant and the defensive tackle, he's right on him, sometimes it just looks like he's just dipping his head. He's not really getting underneath pads, and rarely that can show up as an issue. He's not bad at creating leverage. I kind of put him average here. I think you need to add more consistency to be a consistent blocker for our scheme. He does flash the ability to drop his shoulders, get underneath the pads as a guy that's 6'5", and I believe that, yeah, that will translate and allow him to be successful, even though he's on the taller side for a guard. See him beat the 3-tech to getting his hands on the 3-tech before he even gets his hands on the guard, the 3-tech defensive tackle, and that's a huge part, again, about kicking inside. It's getting set quickly. For him, a lot of it is about positioning, creating leverage, and the way that you do that for him is a lot of times getting set before the defensive player. And for him off the backside to be able to get off the line and position himself before a 3-tech can even get his hands on a guard shows you that kind of twitch and urgency that he plays without the line of scrimmage. That is a huge part of him transitioning, I think, to the interior. Another example, you see him beat a 4-eye to his spot, number 55 there on the light blue. He blew up a 2-eye. You can see that again against the light blue. You saw it against Delaware where he beats the 4-eye to his spot, gets his hand set first. Like, those are the flashes that you get. You get it against dark blue here, cutting off the 4-eye. His pad level in this case was a little bit too high, which is, again, kind of one of those flashes where I think his pad level can get a little bit high. However, what you do like is you see how he fights to reset his hands. Now, this some we'll touch a little bit more on, especially with pass protection, but you do love the fact that he fights to reset his hands throughout the play, and he does this really any way that you utilize him. I think it kind of comes back to some of the polish, some of the experience that he has. He has some of those finishing moves. He has some of the chop downs. Just has a sense of how to utilize his hands, accuracy with his hands, but I love how he continues to work to reset. For him, there's certain matchups where length could be an issue on the edge, especially as a run blocker against some of the guys that are just longer. So for him, a lot of times he had to continuously reset, position his hands inside, and that's something that you won't really ever have issues with, is his activeness with his hand usage. So those are things that I love for sure. High alert eyes pre-snap. Now, for me, it can become a little bit hit and miss here post-snap, specifically in pass protection, but as a run blocker, and you see it first off working to the second level, which I'll save, we'll touch on that, some of the awareness moving up to the second level, but also pre-snap, the alertness pre-snap to identify where he's trying to hit his marks. Now, again, you're kind of blocking an area, but guys that are going to hit that area is something that the awareness kind of comes into play. You saw it here against this dark blue team where the linebacker brought a blitz, and again, you can see him battling to reset his hands, but he's able to identify that target. That's a huge part of it as well. You see it here against red, the quick position, backside edge set. Now, what's an issue here, backside run blocker, is some of the power at the point of attack. I think it's kind of in the poor to below average type of category. This is why leverage consistency is going to be very important for him. This is not an issue with linebackers and DBs. It's an issue at the point of attack against some bigger defensive linemen, is be able to create power at the point of attack. It's not his strength. Cause him to stick a little bit longer before working up to the second level. He can be late to getting up to linebackers because that first initial punch doesn't always create movement, not always able to potentially pass it off to another offensive lineman so he can break up field. The down blocking point of attack power is lacking. So positioning, consistency, more consistency with leverage. I thought it definitely flashed a lot of good, especially in the Shrine Bowl, will help him, but the point of attack power is not necessarily his strength. Now, a guy like Evan Brown, you look at him, that dude was strong as heck in the upper body, right? So you got to keep that in mind, but leverage is going to be the most important thing here, and that's a lot of the times how he wins. Now, when you flip it to more so working on the front side, a lot of the zone runs, the front side, again, was a heavy zone running team there with William and Mary, and this is where I think you got to really understand how good he is with his hands, and you got to enjoy that aspect of his game. It shows up on the backside, the way that he continues to work through his block, position himself, gets his hands in the chest, continues to reset, flip his hips, the looseness in his hips, and then he can maintain a block off the backside stealing edge. But on the front side, it's much more easy to see. And you see the ability to create and set an edge. Now, there's different zone plays, right? Sometimes you get stretch zone plays where it just continues to kind of flow outside and the running back has to pick and choose when he wants to cut upfield. But you also get some of those outside zone runs where he's sealing the edge. Now, the inside zone, I think this is where you saw the least success because, again, the power at the point of attack, the leverage isn't always consistently there, and he doesn't have that sort of natural core strength or power there. But those outside zone runs really starts to show off the hips and also the hand placement. This is every single game, littered every single game. You can just watch example after example after example. If he is rolling his hips through contact and setting the edge, right? Kicking that edge defender out, sealing it off, allowing that running back to run off the backside of him as an offensive tackle. It's just every single game you watch. I mean, it's in the Shrine Bowl. Every game you watch, this guy gives you so many examples of this. The consistency has to be noted because it's real. It's not something that's like, I see that he can do it. It's so consistent. I think it speaks to the polish in that sense of a guy that's played in this scheme that knows how to win, where he drops the defensive end there, number 57, onto his knee, onto the ground. You see it against the yellow team here, number 11, the 5 technique. Watch him roll his hips, right? Now, for me, again, slight lack of core strength, which occasionally will lead to him sort of charging up his hands. You saw it in the Shrine Bowl. Still had success, but you kind of get some of that occasionally, and that can be an issue. And then he also can lose ground moving defensive end to guard. And it's kind of the point that I made earlier, right? If he's trying to seal, get a defensive end to the guard, maybe work up to the second level. For him, sometimes not only can that take a little bit longer, but occasionally can also lose ground at that point of attack as well. And you saw that there against light blue. Now, as a lateral mover, I don't think he's as twitchy in that sense. I think he's much more athletic and he accelerates much better when he's working a little bit more upfield. But there is still a lot to like here. The flexibility, the lean, working up to the second level. We'll touch on that more specifically here in a second. He sets faster than edge defenders. That is just a huge staple of his game, and that's why you want to believe if this process was really slow, you'd be concerned about him transitioning to guard because he's like, man, he's already got to speed up at tackle. That's not his issue right now. He speeds up more than enough. He is quick to get his hand set, quick to get the first punch and beat an edge to his spot, which is again a huge part of his game. He can stay low off the line. This speaks to some of the flexibility. You see it, right? The times that they ask him to put his hand in the dirt. Taylor Decker does this a lot. Penei Sewell does it from time to time. Put your hand in the dirt. We're going to zone block here maybe, and you got to stay low off the line of scrimmage. That can be a challenge, but you see the flexibility. He's able to put his hand in the dirt off the line and stay low. And the big part of that is you're already low, right? So then it's about maintaining that without like falling over, for example, or getting way over your toes. And he's able to do that. He shows that kind of flexibility where I would say he does it with sort of ease. He's able to still stay low with the pad level. So you know the potential, you know the abilities there. Again, it's more consistency for me than anything, but you love that side of his game, especially as a front side zone blocker. They would ask him to do that, stay low against Delaware. Ready hands, prise open the run lane. He plays with a tight core and body weight. He leans towards this contact, right? So you know they're not always going straight up. They're kind of leaning into where they're going to get that contact with their punch, with their hands. So you have to have that tight core into contact. Again, for a guy that did a lot of 45-degree pass sets, he had to play with that tight core, first contact type of deal. And for him, he did that well as a run blocker. And you see that through his ability to roll his hips over to create really good force at the point of attack. While not being the strongest guy, but understanding the position, the leverage side of it. Where you really like him as well is working up as a second level blocker. Excellent pacing. This is a huge part of it for me. Well, again, laterally, I don't think he has the elite movement skills. What I do like here is I think he plays with excellent pacing. Again, we're staying as a run blocker. Supposed to be a little bit lighter on his feet, but then also that pacing working laterally, working up to the second level. Now, sometimes it's not even always working up to the second level. It's just pacing to position himself, depending on what the play may be asking, to position himself correctly for a block. But also working to the second level, you do get that correct pacing as well. When he needs to hit the gas, he can step on, he can accelerate, and he can close distance quickly, which we'll take a look at. But you also see, for example, here, he's mirroring the linebacker, squares him up. You see here against number 55 in the light blue. You can see again rolling into the second level here. He punches the 3-tech, slides up to the linebacker, gets an inside punch. That's something that he does a lot. You saw it on a screenplay. They threw a screen his way. They didn't do this a ton actually, but you see him able to get there out in space, pace himself well, position himself, and then finish the block out in space, right? It's not always about moving fast. It's about staying with good body control and agility. Body control is the thing that stands out here, and you'll see in pass pro when he recovers from very weird positions and some of the flexibility, you're like, oh, that's there, but it's really about the body control for him to the second level. But again, as I touched on, there is gas when he needs to. Now back to the hands. I like how he avoids holding penalties. I can't count many holding penalties that I noticed. Maybe a 1 or 2, that's it. Not a lot of holding penalties. I know there was one false start that I saw. Rarely gets called for holding, which I think is something he's going to have to be a little bit more conscious of at the next level, because occasionally he'll get kind of complacent with just kind of holding on to his shoulder even as the guy is pulling away from him. pass protection that shows up, and he's not really moving his feet, and for that, you can definitely get called for holding. But he does do a pretty nice job of, especially at the second level, if a linebacker starts to pull away, releasing, not getting called for holding. That's just like, hey, even if you don't get your block, don't hold, because if he's at the second level, the back's already there, and you're holding, you're hurting us. So don't do that. Don't pull the play back. With that, what we like is the hand usage in terms of accurate punches on contact. Light blue here, 3 tech to the linebacker. This is a beautiful rep. Again, the accuracy, and then the closing speed. This is like, I don't know, you talk about this with a lot of other positions, maybe edge rusher, but how about with an offensive tackle, the closing speed to the second level here against the red team, number 35. You can see him close, the closing speed here on this first clip up to the linebacker. Now, he is missing some length, and this shows up in a lot of areas. Pass protections where it's, most talked about, but it does show up here a little bit as well. You'll see it outside the tackle box. Occasionally with linebackers, they'll kind of give him a late little like side step, and he'll whiff, right? He lacks some length there. They can kind of step away from him. You saw it against Delaware. That can show up as an issue. Sometimes they run themselves out of the play with that, so it's like, hey, job well done. But length can pop up a little bit of an issue here. Sometimes he can't always make contact without closing the distance that he necessarily wants to. However, with that being said, great body control, as I touched on, to stop and start, the movement speed, the pacing. You see it again here against red, this second clip that we have. Now, one thing that you don't love is I do feel like his feet can get a little bit stuck in the mud. You see it here against Delaware and trip it over an offensive lineman. Keeping the feet close to the ground is fine, but I think he can get his feet can get a little bit stuck in the mud. He's not like the lightest, I wouldn't say necessarily on his toes as a run blocker. I think it does show up a little bit when working as a wrapping, pulling offensive lineman, working around the offensive line. Sometimes it can look a little bit choppy. It's not as fluid working around there. However, with that being said, though, I like a lot of things about his ability to get up to the second level and block. And again, that's a huge part of what we do, right? Obviously, as his own blocker, blocking an area, getting to linebackers, things like that. But also as a gap blocker, because depending on, which gap you're trying to create, sometimes those backside blocks, right, you have to get up, and your guy's the linebacker, so you have to find a way to get up and position yourself to make that block. And for him, again, the ability to do that, right, you can't cut block at the second level, so the ability to move up there with fluidity, control, body control is going to be massive in this game, because again, positioning more so over power, and that is exactly who he is, positioning over power. So it makes tons of sense. Good sustainability, okay? Obviously, we took a look at the screen block, but good sustainability with hand placement to connect with linebackers. And that's the thing, because of his accurate punches, he gets his hands in your chest, and that's how he can sustain blocks, right? That's where you get plus sustainability. It's not always there. The lack of length could show up as an issue. Sometimes guys can kind of work off of him later, but a lot of times they have to work away from the play first before they can get back into the play. However, it is good sustainability, and he's not on the ground often. A lot of times guys get in second level a lot. They're falling on the ground, reaching, falling over. He's not on the ground that often. He's almost more often on the ground near line of scrimmage than he is getting out to the second, third level. And that is where I think you are impressed with the athleticism, because it's not just about speed when you talk athletes, it's about control as well. And he definitely has that. You see him skip up here to the gold and white slot. Watch this pancake block. Like, that's just what we're talking about. Examples are everywhere. Now, onto some of the pull blocks when he's asked to pull around as an offensive lineman. It was not something that he did often. I thought for him, there's a couple things. First off, he can kind of have this in a lot of different sets. There can be like a slight little lean. You have to watch that pre-snap for false starts. But also at the snap, sometimes he has like weird hitches before he gets to his move. It's not always fluid. You see it as a pull blocker where he kind of has like a little slight dip before he bounces back and takes off. So occasionally you can get sort of tells. I could see how defensive lineman could catch on to certain things that he's showing. It's not too bad, but something to be aware of. But also his feet, I think, can look a little bit heavy, as I touched on, when wrapping around offensive linemen. I think he's a little bit lighter on his toes than some offensive linemen, but he doesn't necessarily look like, as Rab will put, twinkle toes a lot of the times. But once he gets around the offensive lineman, he can work his way to second level. That's when he's able to play really to his strengths. It's a downhill blocker. Again, a couple last notes here. I think it's lacking sustainability. Again, you talk about the power at the point of attack is a big reason for that. Inside zone blocks was not necessarily where he had the most success. Again, tight end crashing down, inside zone block. He's got to, pick up the defensive end, and he struggled to create movement there, right? Being the guy that had to take on a majority of the blow and that the tight end could crash down trying to create that movement, he didn't consistently create movement there. He was much better as the guy that would crash down on the DT and create movement in that sense. But creating movement at the point of attack wasn't necessarily his biggest strength. Especially going to guard could pop up a little bit more there. And again, the big reason for me is pad level gets a little too high. Plus, on top of that, I think he lacks a little bit of the drive power. That's pretty much everything I had. Quick note, final note. Then we'll go to pass pro. Great target finder at the second level. That's how I wrote it down. It was almost like a heat-seeking missile sometimes. It was just like he finds his targets. He's really good at finding targets second level. Pacing movement well to align to play design. He continues to rework his hands on contact inside, continues to battle even if initially he loses that battle. You'll see him recover. He's not on the ground a lot, even in bad spots when he gets like blown off the ball and you're like, oh man, he's going down here. He like recovers himself and he starts fighting his hands back inside. Now occasionally that's where you got to be aware of him not getting called for holding. It didn't really happen, but he can grab and kind of lean on that a little bit more. But you do like the recovery athleticism. He uses the inside arm to chop down. This is where you talk about the hand usage. Pass protection shows up as well, but it does show up as run block. Because again, when you're setting those edges, especially on the backside, but also it can happen on the front side as well, but more so on the backside. When you're trying to seal kind of an edge, and then an edge rusher is a little bit longer than you, can kind of get in his chest and reach him out. Do you see the nice job for him to kind of reset his hands because he can't reach anyways? Chop down. 3-4 examples I could show of defensive end falling on the ground, right? There's multiple examples of that, using that inside arm to set the edge. And then again, the length become a little bit of an issue at the point of attack. That's why moving him inside would not shock anybody, because of the lack of length. And there are certain matchups where you're like, ooh, that looks like it's more of an issue than this other game. I didn't see that being an issue. To the pass sets, and honestly, we'll probably go through this a little bit quicker, but some of the main notes that I have here, we'll kind of go through just a couple different like looks. Now, again, a majority of it, 45-degree sets. Didn't always jump the sets out of that, meaning kind of how we got off the line of scrimmage. It was a 45-degree angle. We got 3 main ones to talk about: jump setting off the line, getting your hands in guys quickly, like immediately off the snap, 45 degrees, releasing 45 degrees. You can jump into that, you can kind of play back, but it's, you know, kind of like a little bit of an in-between. And then you have your vertical pass set, which is just how it sounds, vertically dropping in a pass set. So in that sense, you're closer to the quarterback. So for you, you're kind of on an island working in that case. But we'll start off with some of the jump setting here, right? The lateral movement for me, and this shows up in a lot of instances, it's kind of hit and miss. It can get a little bit high, especially as a guy that jump sets a little bit. I think his base width gets tight. Some issues with some of the pass rush moves where they would kind of work in and outs on him. You even saw it against the run a little bit there against the red team. But you do like the impressive athleticism, the recovery athleticism, the way that he can work around the edge to just drop step and then recover and just kind of push his man out of the pocket, because again, a lot of these jump sets are much quicker passes. But you do see that recovery athleticism for him to just kind of turn and get a hand and kind of squeeze him out of the pocket, save some plays that maybe he shouldn't have been able to. I do think he's missing a little bit of a power step. You see that against inside counters without help. Big part is I would like to see him reset his weight a little bit. Like there are occasions where I would like to see him reset his weight. You see it on stunts when guys working inside to outside. He gets contact, but then he doesn't always reset his hips to, you know, really kind of make an anchor. Sometimes they'll just kind of stand straight up with the block. It's fine in a lot of cases because of a lot of what they're asking for as a blocker, and he can maintain. That could become a little bit more priority, especially when working on the interior, you know, resetting, setting down an anchor that we are not giving up, especially some of those inside counters, for example. May not call it necessary in an instance like this to reset his pads, because as you're going to see, his eyes continue to flash back and forth. He recognizes pre-snap that there's only the 3 tech, so he's continuously peeking for the slot to be aware if that edge rush does come. That way he can give it off to the guard and then get out to that blitzer. That never happens, but he's constantly keeping his eyes there, understanding that there's no one else on his side, and on top of that, he's kind of holding it there for the guard to take over. But you do also notice that he tries to sit down, get some power into that punch. He's not able to really create a lot of power into that step to really completely readjust. So this isn't the best example, but it does show off some of his awareness. Now you get a play like this, we're going to see they're going to show 2 edge rushers here, and it's going to force him to overset. But again, using that drag hand here, he's able to gain that connection. I got to watch a little bit for the grab on the shoulder, but you can see he tries to kind of reset his weight here. He bounces back a little bit in the anchor, but he forces him out of the pocket and really does his job, still maintaining balance. Now, he worked a lot more in kind of that 45-degree set from the right tackle position. We do it a lot with our tackles as well. Not to say we only do that, but we do it a lot with our tackles. So it's part of the reason I think he could play there, especially in a pinch. I think he can become a little bit of a catcher in this sense. Sometimes he creates a little bit of a soft edge. Specifically, it starts with a little bit of the base, and then also the depth that he gets in his pass protection set. Sometimes it gets a little bit, too shallow, and they can kind of soften that edge and get around him. Here you see him jump into the edge. Now you're going to notice he's going to get a little bit over his toes on a play like this, and his base gets kind of tight. He's also a little tall, so he goes to that push-pull as an edge rusher. But notice he does get the inside hand, and because of that accuracy and that grip, he's able to recover. He's jumping into edge defenders out of this pass set. You know, sometimes he'll get his weight over his toes, and he gets capable of being beat inside because he starts to kind of fall over his toes. Now, part of this is when you're jumping in, you don't have the length. If they can kind of work inside and then flash back outside, and he starts to reach for it, that's when his weight starts to shift a little bit over his toes. So just some balance things, consistency in his base. The depth could be a little bit more consistent as well. You'll get some issues there at the point of attack, but he also knows, based on what they're asking him to do as a blocker, when he can get aggressive, when he has that guard help inside, because a lot of these cases, you know, you have to be aware of that, and that comes back to that pre-snap awareness. So he knows when he can get a little bit aggressive on the edge because he's going to have that guard help inside to kind of pass it off to. It's a big reason I think he'll be more consistent. He can be more consistent as a pass protector on the interior, right? I feel like he's a better run blocker than a pass protector now, but weirdly enough, I feel like he could be, the transition to guard could help more as a pass protector versus as a run blocker. Quickly close distance. You see this, the kind of the foot speed that he does have, especially when he sits down. You see the foot speed that he has. He's capable of quickly closing distance. The power is lacking a little bit against red. Even when he steps into it, you see him kind of get pushed back. But you do see that, again, he can kind of drop shoulders, get underneath the pads. You saw it here against Gold and White, right? When his assignment basically dropped out and he was able to sit down and then basically just run over this defensive tackle, get the kind of pancake block. What I really like, though, as a pass protector is he keeps his hands holstered, he keeps his hands prepared, ready to punch. He keeps a really tight core. First contact punches, I think he's much better getting his hands on quickly. It's how he likes to play. He seems to want to play with that aggressive style. Should help him transition to guard. You're going to get on guys quick. You're going to do a lot of the jump setting from the guard position. It's what you ask a lot, what we ask of our guys. Plus, you have to keep in mind on the pass pro, we do a lot of run fakes. So we do a lot of, you know, kind of either the power block look or the zone blocking look, and we fake out of it to set up our play action, right? So it's not just normal pass protection. Now, I guess in that sense, more of a slide protection, but we do a lot of our run looks on pass sets, which means they have to stay low off the line, which he can do. He's capable of quickly getting off the line, but then also still playing that out, but getting hands on quickly. And for him, that's where he seems his most comfortable. So I think it will help him transitioning to that guard position, especially with a lot of the play action that we utilized. He is missing some length, and you see that when he jump sets outside versus some of the side steps, because again, he can lack some of that length and he's really trying to close that distance. And the issue becomes when they sidestep around it, now they can get around his edge and it kind of creates a little bit of a softer edge. Here he never jumps to the edge. Part of that may be that he doesn't have the help from the guard on this side. However, you're going to notice on this play that as the edge rusher pushes upfield on him, he continues to protect inside here. But as the edge rusher continues to push upfield and he goes to punch, that's when the edge rusher then gives you that hesitation back outside, and he doesn't maybe have that length to be able to get good connection there. But you do see that recovery athleticism to open and protect the edge. Now, you do get a similar type of look here in the Shrine Bowl. Again, kind of playing with the guard here. You get that 45-degree, you know, set off the line of scrimmage to 3 steps. So you're kind of expecting the ball to be out here pretty quickly. But again, you notice on this play, as that edge rusher sinks outside, that's when he sees the opportunity to strike and punch and attack and get on the edge rusher. But again, just a little bit, maybe too much distance there. Struggling a little bit to consistently get his hands and lock out that edge. They can kind of squeeze around a softer edge in that case, and it's almost like maybe he has to close just a little bit more distance. And again, that comes back to some of the lack of length as well. And then occasionally when he's asked a vertical set, actually, he didn't look too bad here. He didn't look too bad here at all, actually. The biggest issue, again, to me, came from when he would, like, it didn't happen a ton, but when he would flash where he'd get kind of perpendicular with the line of scrimmage versus kind of an inside then out pass rush moves where he would open himself up. That can open him up to inside a counter for him when he was trying to create kind of that fast depth. But you saw the recovery ability to stay on his feet, reset his hips. There was a really clean set here against Delaware. He's working against a 9 technique. You can see outside the tight end here. Look at the timing for the punch when the defender opens up, matches with the kick slide. He's got a smooth kick slide that he can create a lot of speed. And the biggest thing for me is when he keeps the pad level down, he can really create depth quickly in that kick slide. And he does a pretty nice job of matching based on that alone. It's just that when he's asked to kind of get up and set and he's playing on the edge, occasionally if he has to get up on it, trying to jump it, if they can get around his edge by showing an in and out type of move, then they could start to soften him up towards the outside. Or if on the outside he gets a little bit too deep because, you know, he's adjusting to, maybe they throw a little hesitation look at him and then they turn on the gas around the corner and he tries to reset back outside and his base gets messed up, then they can long arm, get him back inside. Again, two type of similar looks here from Caleb Murphy. You definitely get more consistency when he has a tight end. He's forcing an inside pass or path or a wider path against Colby Sorsdal. But you do like his ability to sustain. You get these outside jabs late, trying to open up the inside for a little bit of a knockback. And there you see it, but you get some of the sustainability. For him, it's about being able to keep balance and a good base, because like this, he'll take that outside jab and get his base wide and then go through the chest. You like to sustain, although he does work his way a little bit through the edge on this play. You get an example like this where the edge seems to get softer kind of as the play goes on. He gets his hands underneath the pads here. We're going to see his base get narrow on contact. Again, kind of setting down that anchor. A little bit more of a catch here than necessarily the punch. And then it kind of softens up as it goes. And again here, as he sets in that 45-degree angle, here the edge rusher kind of sets him up with the hesitation, the long arms. He starts to almost open himself up, but just 1 foot moves. He gets wide. Now his hands are no longer inside. And again, you can see that he's not really sitting down into a strong anchor here, and he's pushed back, and ultimately he loses this defender. Now, you get a play like this where, yes, the pad level is a little bit high, and I think that leads to an issue here. You do get some of that torque inside, kind of sets to that 45-degree angle here, but notice how this edge rusher late, or the defensive tackle, kicks outside. That puts him in a tough situation to recover towards the edge. His base is pretty tight together, and in this case, you're going to see he start to work around the edge. The positive is, though, he gets an inside hand punch, and he leans on that grip throughout the rest of the rep and really protects the inside of the pocket. It's really more depth issues than it is the fluidity as movement skills. You see it when he's asked to use some of these vertical sets, opens up, matches with the kick slide, but he has that kick slide speed to match up a speed rusher. Now, he can be a little bit late to outside blitzers. This is where I knock some of his awareness. I think it shows up in pass pro. One with stunts, and partially this can be an issue with stunts if you're not vertical pass setting, where you can have an issue with stunts to deal with because it's kind of hard to deal with that already. And now this one's a little bit better of an example, but usually what comes up as the issue on stunts, he uses that drag hand well on some of these 45-degree sets. The issue becomes setting that anchor, resetting back down when that interior rusher gets on him. He usually finds the contact. It's just sitting himself down to then be able to stonewall that pass rush. However, in this case, the edge rusher never, or the defensive tackle really never becomes able to bull rush him because he's off balance. But because of that, you get to see the nice hand usage, the way that he gets himself inside, resets his hands, and also some of the foot quickness and how nimble his feet are. But that can show up as an issue, and so can sometimes being a little bit late to recognize that a blitzer is coming. Now, you do see the recovery athleticism and the want to position himself, but he can be a little bit late in that sense. But again, what you like is him at the point of attack. Active hands, finishing chop downs. He's built for quick sets, in my opinion, because he's very accurate. He knows when to punch. He knows when to get inside. He continues to reset his hands. He's got a tight core at the point of attack. He can sell out the run fakes. And I think for him, because he's going to be playing a little bit more towards the interior, it fits his role of getting pulled away from the offensive line and kind of being put on an island, because the lack of length can pop up a little bit there. Now, Decker does it. Penei Sewell has a little bit longer arms, but not much longer. So I do feel like he could play right tackle because he showed some of the comfortability in some of those vertical pass sets. I really think there's ability there. There just needs to be cleaned up in some of the depth he creates, and also keeping the base width, because that can be thrown off from time to time, and that's where issues pop up. But I do think that he's built for quick setting consistently, and for him, I think being pushed to the interior, you're going to see that asked of him a ton. It makes sense, I think, from a trade standpoint. Again, versus stunts, what I like is how he gets his hands inside. He uses drag hand well from the outside to inside, especially on some of those 45-degree sets. But again, I would like to see him work to reset his base, create that power step, that way he can seal off the inside. I think that's an area where you would like to see maybe more just work in terms of resetting his base, because sometimes he gets a little bit just comfortable with like standing straight up, and he doesn't reset and create a strong anchor. And again, that can be almost popped up a little bit more at tackle. Guard, it's going to be tested immediately because they're going to get in your chest fast. I don't think he has a bad anchor in terms of strength. I've seen that be questioned. I don't think that's the question. The question is when his balance gets thrown off, the anchor gets thrown off. And especially from the interior, you're not going to get a lot of guys that are going to be, wrapping around or getting a head start, unless it's a linebacker, which I think he'll be fine with, or an outside working towards inside, which definitely could be a question. However, for him, the issue becomes when his balance gets thrown off. I think from the interior, less room to maneuver, much quicker action. I think it'll help him because his balance hopefully will stay a little bit more consistent there, and I think he definitely shows that strength to get his hands on quickly. Boom, punch early. I think he shows that ability to win in that way. The mirror match needs some work. However, I think he clearly has the movement skills. Now, with that being said, that takes us to sort of this kind of grading look that I have put together here. As you guys can see here, 5 different grades: run, block, pass protection, play strength, awareness, hands. It's not exactly how I do it, but it's kind of an idea just to look at. So the blue ones that are filled in are, you know, kind of the grade filling up there. Run block, you can see I gave him a good grade here. I like him as a run blocker, though as I said, I could have some more questions with him as a guard. I like him. I think he's a good run blocker, especially as a right tackle. However, pass protection, you see I gave him a lower grade here. I'm kind of in the below average to average type, but I actually think at guard he could actually be a better pass protector. So it's kind of like a weird back and forth there. His play strength, I think, is probably the biggest issue, but for our scheme we're going to lean a little bit more, I think, on positioning, leverage, necessarily just pure power, but that's kind of where I have the biggest lack for him. The awareness is solid. I think it's average awareness. Again, the stunts and some of the, you know, late blitz pickups I think can get to him and kind of flash. That could be a little bit more scheme though than anything. However, what you do like is the awareness to the second level. You do like the awareness pre-snap, and then the hand usage is where I like him the most. I think this comes back to polish. I think it comes back to reps. You see it as a run blocker. You see it in pass protection with it. He resets the accuracy on his punches. When to punch is probably the biggest thing that could honestly be improved, but that's more of a full body thing than it is just his hands. I really like the hand usage and the efficiency that he has here. That's where I have the highest grade for him of these 5 traits. So really, to me, I think the biggest thing is we just needed a guy that we felt good about as a versatile backup offensive lineman. Down the road, I would assume guard is probably the spot where he'll compete potentially for a starting spot. I do think he could play right tackle or tackle in a pinch, and right tackle is definitely a spot that we could use that. I think he could do it in a pinch because of what we ask for offensive linemen, you know, some of the sets that we ask of them. But I do think long term it would make sense that you would look at guard and say that's the position where you could have the most success if he puts it all together because of what he's good at and maybe what he's not so good at. So for me, that's what the grades look like. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below on Colby Sorsdal. Thank you, for watching, and I'm out.